Is that great or what? And I did see National Archives, very small print right in there. A few films in there, photographs. I'd like to welcome to the stage, we're going to have a terrific conversation. We could get our lights up on the stage. That would help me. Thank you. Moderating, and I'd like to invite you all to come up to the stage while I'm introducing you. Moderating is Marcia Cook. Marcia's award-winning news and media veteran with a career spanning over 3 decades. She serves as a vice president, executive producer of ESPN Films and 30 for 30. I might have asked her for an internship when we were in the back. It's an amazing job. Joining her is Don Porter. Don is the director of 37 Words, an award-winning filmmaker who is considered a leader in the art of storytelling, directing, and producing critically acclaimed projects that have impacted generations of people of all walks of life. In 2021, she directed and executive produced Oprah Winfrey and Prince Harry's documentary on mental illness and mental well-being titled The Me You Can't See. She also directed the 2022 AANCP Image Award-nominated Rise Again, Tulsa and the Red Summer, seen on National Geographic. She has 2 Emmy-nominated documentaries, 2-time Sundance Film Festival director, and has worked with HBO, Discovery, PBS, among numerous other accolades. And our final participant will look familiar. She was on screen, Donna De Verona, at age 13. She was the youngest member of the United States swimming team at the Olympic Games in Rome in 1960. I won't go into everything because it was well said in the film, but I will say she did retire at age 17 and began a successful sportscasting career. And as you might not know, she helped co-found the Women's Sports Foundation. She's earned many honors for her swimming career and continued advocacy for women in sports. I cede the stage to Marcia and you all. Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm actually going to start with a question to the audience. How many of you knew about Title IX before, understood Title IX before this film, before watching this film? All right. Better numbers than usual.
Better numbers than usual.
I personally think this film is a revelation, having nothing to do with the fact that I work for ESPN. What surprises you still? We've now collectively probably seen this film dozens of times. Donna, I'll start with you. What surprises you?
I wish I could say that I'm surprised by what's going on, but as one who helped start the Women's Sports Foundation, I was the first president. Billie Jean's the founder. We came to Washington consistently with those women's groups that talked. We were the visual affirmation of what they were fighting for, and we could get the press. So we labored a lot on the Hill. In fact, I left television to work in the Senate with Senator Stevens, who was given credit in the film, because we needed a strong Republican, and fortunately it worked all his way to the appropriations. But as one who's been involved in network television, as one of the first pioneering women, all men, most of the time I worked with, as one who kept fighting for Title IX. I mean, you talk about the Tower Amendment or the Javis Amendment. You talk about all the times we had to keep our ear to the ground and understand that there's some legislation coming the way, Supreme Court decision to really eradicate Title IX under Reagan. So I'm not surprised. And I was torn apart by the Supreme Court decision, Roe versus Wade. What I find frightening is I was just at the National Women's Hall of Fame, and I inducted Mia Hamm, which was really wonderful to do that. And I had 250 high school students, soccer players, women, in the audience because we gave them a talk. And I asked them, it's the 50th anniversary. There's a birthday out there. What is it? Not one hand. And these aren't shy kids. And then I said, who knows what Title IX is in this audience? Not one player knew. Which, as my daughter said, why don't they teach us about Title IX in school? I think that's a red flag. Because if we don't know it, we can't protect it. And that's it. We don't know it. So I would like to say I'm surprised, but I'm not. What I am grateful for is that you and ESPN and the sponsors stood up and decided to recapture history and to go back and talk to those women who, thank goodness we have them on film, and what their contributions were, and what it's like when networks of women get together and we work together to get something done. And we need to do that again.
Yeah. The sisterhood is powerful.
It's powerful that it's done because we've captured a piece of history, we've documented it, and we needed that. So thank you.
Dawn, when you kind of re-rack the tape in your head, thinking back to when you decided to work on this project, what made it potentially even more special for you as you began to kind of unearth and resurrect all of these stories that are related to the birth of Title IX?
Well, my first career is I was a lawyer, and I practiced in D.C. I worked for Baker and Hostetler for 5 years as a lawyer, and I lived here in D.C. And so I'm a geek, and I really love archival footage. And, I think we're living in a time where we forget some of the details of how progress is made. And it's step by step. It's not always giant leaps and bounds. And so what I appreciated is, ESPN just called me up and said, would you like to do something about Title IX? And I was like, sure. And I was like, I don't know what they have in mind. But, you say yes when you have those opportunities. And what I really appreciated is, my team, we came back to them and said, what we really want to lead into is that Title IX is a civil rights law. And we want to, and so they said, that's great. Like, it doesn't have to be sports. The research shows that the sports battles became the most visible and significant. And that's why, there's a misunderstanding that Title IX is all about sports. Those are the things that, it's football. People were fighting really hard and really visibly to protect those sports. But the breadth of Title IX, in the end, it's the breadth of this law that is so inspiring. So this is 4 hours. That's the origin stories. Donna said, I really wanted to remind people what it was like. I mean, can you imagine today law schools with 4% are women? Today, law schools are 54%, or more than 50%, and medical schools are between 54 and 60% female. And that is a direct, response of getting rid of those quotas, allowing women to pursue based on merit. And so that is part of the legacy of Title IX that is so important to emphasize.
When you both think about the power of film, Donna kind of just said a pioneer. She was the first female sportscaster, commentator on network television. I remember hearing her voice when I watched Olympiads, like in '72 in Munich. But when you think about the power of film, especially when we think about this film, what work still needs to be done with these kinds of narrative stories? We got to do this because we attached it to the 50th anniversary, right? So it made it something that was a much bigger initiative. But I'm painfully aware, as we all are, that on July 1st, then you have to try and figure out how to keep the story alive. And luckily, Patrick and the National Archives said, we've got this great exhibit. Yes, we can showcase the film again. But what's the work that has to be done to keep these stories alive?
Well, we need to tell more stories. I mean, you touched on Wyoming and Tyus. I remember when you guys called me and said, who should we cover and why? And I said, Wyoming Tyus was the first woman ever win back-to-back 100 meters, and she's lost to history. And you can't imagine how grateful she is that you brought her back to life. But then you watch the Olympics in Tokyo, and they cover women's 100 meters, and they don't mention the history. Evelyn Ashford is totally lost. And so we need more women that are working in sports television, and I'm just talking sports now because I think we need to cover all women leaders, but that don't wait 50 years to say, we've got a reason to do it. We need to continue to do it. And I think young men and young women want to see these stories. And there's some beautiful stories about women that go beyond winning, that contribute in so many ways. It's the field of play that launches you into becoming a doctor, becoming a top coach, becoming a sportscaster, becoming a great lawyer. And those
CEO.
Stories are there. We've got to find them. But we can't wait till the 50th anniversary to do it. And there's a lot that you did cover in this story, but you couldn't do it all. And I'm sure that was frustrating.
It was very frustrating.
I mean, what did you leave out that you didn't have time for that you wish could have
There we go.
gotten in?
There's,
I'm sorry.
There's the journalist right there. Okay.
There's a lot. I mean, there's a lot more detail about some of the early battles. Certainly, we had to choose the through line to go through all 4 hours. So we go from this early history to focusing in the 1970s on Yale University and the women's crew team. And the crew team the conditions were abhorrent. And Yale was, really a hotbed of sexism. And those women were treated terribly.
I know.
So there's one very, really just egregious story of sex harassment that kind of broke our hearts to not include. So that's just one story. But I do focus really, and I am really, really happy with the effort to publicize and to disseminate this across the ESPN platforms. So it's on the Disney bundle, so a lot of young girls will see this. And representation matters. I mean, I was small when Donna was a sportscaster when she started, but I do remember being a little girl and seeing a woman talking about physical strength and talking about that type of accomplishment. And while we always emphasize that Title IX is more than sports, it is really significant in our research. 82% of CEOs, female CEOs, say they played some kind of sport at some point in their lives. Yeah. Really, really interesting. So the lesson of sports, confidence in your body, feeling strong, teamwork, leadership, all of those things extend beyond, the field or the pool. So Dawn Staley, when we got to talk to her, she said most of her athletes, South Carolina, go Lady Gamecocks, most of them are not going to play pro. That's not what she's doing. She's educating people and she's raising leaders. And that's what we, really need to focus on. That's part of the opportunity that is missed if we don't assure this opportunity for girls.
When you think about these other chapters, and though, Donna, you were featured in part 1, what's your favorite story? And we encourage everyone to watch parts 2, 3, and 4 to be found on ESPN.
Yes.
It's definitely hard to pick. So some of them, actually one of the stories, Donna's also in another episode, there was a small but mighty battle that Donna was spearheaded to make sure that Title IX wasn't completely eviscerated.
Oh, yeah.
And people don't know that, when small things matter. I mean, we're sitting in the National Archives today, and it's important that records are sent here. It's important that we think about process, because in order to inspire leaders, you have to demystify action. You have to say, this is what you do tomorrow. You get a group of women in a room, and they go around and say, how do I make a small amount of progress? And I don't know if you want to tell the story about you and Julie Foudy.
Sure,
I mean,
yeah.
it's a really important story. Title IX could have, but for these women, we would not have Title IX. And we need to remember that it is all of our responsibility to preserve democracy. I mean that very seriously. We can't count on somebody else to preserve our rights. So I would love if you would talk about that.
It's a story of Bush 43, who was president, obviously, and Hastert, who was Speaker of the House, was a wrestler, and he blamed Title IX for the demise of wrestling in the United States. But the demise of wrestling wasn't because of Title IX. It had to do with insurance. It had to do with poor leadership. And by the way, it's making a comeback. And now that the women are wrestling, it's really making a comeback. But when the president was elected, Hastert went to him and said, you got to look at this Title IX. It's disseminating all, especially my sport. Well, fortunately, I had left television to work in the U.S. Senate to get the Amateur Sports Act passed and also to work on Title IX under Senator Stevens, who was a Republican. He never gets enough credit for what he did, but he was head of appropriations, and he could hold people's feet to the fire. So he went to Hastert and said, Hastert, you want to gut Title IX. That's not going to happen. But he went around him to the president, and the president called for the appointment of the Opportunity and Athletics Commission. And Stevens said, I know he did this. Donna's got to be on the commission. And I always walked a little bit on the other side of the aisle because we need somebody to do it. And so I got a call, and some of my feminist friends said, you can't go on that commission. That's crazy. It's going to whitewash. You're going to be part of something that guts Title IX. I said, well, I learned something from the head of the International Olympic Committee. Keep your friends close, but your enemies closer. So I said, I got a call from the White House, would you go on the commission? And I said, yes, but I will only if Julie Foudy can come on the commission. Julie Foudy, Stanford graduate, she was part of the 99ers team, soccer team, she's brilliant. And I wanted an ally, because I realized we were up against all Division I athletic directors. And when I went into the commission, of course you get, if it's the Opportunity Athletics Commission, we have to look at the broad strokes. This shouldn't just be about Title IX. It should be about the fact that most of our kids women drop out of sports twice the number as men at age 14. We got problems in our schools. You get access really according to your zip code. Are we going to talk about that? Oh, yes. Well, that was not what happened. The whole idea was to change how the regulations are applied to sports under Title IX. And all the way through, Julie and I battled and battled. We had hearings. The hearings were stacked with people against Title IX. And finally, we argued when we came out with a report for a minority report, because we were the minority, the major report and a minority report. And Rod Page, who was Secretary of Education, said, well, you'll get that. Well, what I did was, with Julie, was, this is, again, to your point, I had brought in Nawal Ioudamakil from Morocco, who won the 400-meter hurdles at the Olympics in LA, to meet with us in the Senate dining room, knowing that Rod Page would be there. And this was right before the commission report was going to be released. And I went over to Rod Page with Senator Stevens, and his wife brought a Title IX hat, and we put it on his head. And we took this picture with this international athlete. And by the way, at the time, we were getting a lot of press, and parents were writing to the White House saying, we want our girls to have sports. Don't change Title IX. And I don't think the president really understood what he had gotten into, and it was up for election. So they backed off of the regulations for a while. But we also had an ally in Hillary Clinton, who I had worked with on and off for a very long time, and she was a senator then. And we held a press conference, and we said we are going to submit the minority report in the Senate because Rod Page wasn't going to do it. And we did that. And we had all those contacts because all of us had been toiling in this world since the 70s. I came back from the Munich Olympics after the terrorist attack in the village, and I ran into Margot Polivy, who you saw on the screen, and I was trying to get athletes' voice, athletes' rights, and Margot came up to me and said, "You're working on the Olympic thing, you've got to know about Title IX." And that's where it all began. But these stories, you couldn't tell that story. Yeah. It would take too long. But that's how things get done. By personal relationships, by having a long relationship with people on the Hill, and thankfully we had Senator Stevens in our corner, and Birch by the way, who would sit with us and strategize with us that whole year during the Opportunity in Athletics Commission. And so basically nothing happened, but then after the election, the administration did change one regulation and how it applies. And when President Obama was elected, that was rescinded.
I think that one of the things that I found most striking in this particular episode was the kind of coming together of someone like Birch, enlightened by his wife and all of the brilliant women, but also then the story of Bunny. I mean, Bunny.
Oh, great.
Bunny could have been a Supreme Court justice.
Yes.
You know. So again, finding those wonderful nuggets, those stories, but also reminding people that it was just 50 years ago.
Yeah.
That's the thing that I still can't quite wrap my head around.
Yeah, there's a remarkable amount of progress, both in women in all fields, all professional fields. I think one of the other things that's so exciting to me, also as a lawyer, is how Title IX protects against sex harassment.
Yes.
There's a big Supreme Court case, Irelia Davis, a young girl who was being harassed by a peer. And Verna Williams of the National Women's Law Center, who you saw worked with Marcia Greenberger, and so her mother was a mailroom worker, and she said, "That's not right. That my daughter can't go to school and get an education because the kid next to her is grabbing her breasts and making sexual remarks." These are 10-year-olds, and so that case established that child-on-child sex harassment is actionable under Title IX because you can't get an education if you're being harassed. So the sex harassment discussion that we have also has its basis in those 37 words. And I think that that's just remarkable, that from Bunny's aha moment in her dining room, that we have many cases that have gone to the Supreme Court. The last episode deals with the effort by girls we are still fighting these battles today. And so one of my favorite stories is these girls in the Pacific Northwest, $100 million renovation of their high school. They're promised a softball field, and the boys are getting a professional baseball field. And when I say professional, it's like wired for internet, it's lights at home, it's all Friday night lights for baseball. And the girls are going to get a softball field. Plans go, budget cuts go, time goes. What goes first? The girls' facility, the softball field. Yeah. They cut it. And so the coach, who had been working for the school, had been a good soldier for more than 2 decades, just really was upset. She motivated the parents. They agreed to sue under Title IX. So they sue. They go to settlement. The settlement is build the field. It's not money. It's build the field. We just want our field. Because the girls were playing in a public park, which was dangerous. There were, dips. There's dog poop. It's just home plate isn't lined up with the batter, with the pitcher mound. It's insane. So the lawyers representing them, they settle, and the settlement is that the girls' field would get built. And the lawyers are really smart. the lawyer said, all right, well, that's great, but the boys can't play on their beautiful field until the girls' field is done. And so so my co-director, Nicole Noonan, who lives on the West Coast, couldn't be here tonight, but so Nicole goes with our cameras, and we film, and we're doing stuff. And we're good journalists, we asked, the school board for comment, and they said, we'll get back to you. And the next time Nicole went back, there were some diggers there making that field. And so, but it was teenagers. Those are the plaintiffs. And the teenagers of today are just not going to accept inequality. They just won't accept it. And I think that of all the accomplishments of Title IX, part of it is that inspiration, is that saying, you don't have to accept that. And that power and that feeling of victory, those girls will not get to play on the field. They will graduate before it's done. But each and every one of them, and this happened with so many of the women that we interviewed, said, this isn't about me and facilities for me, it's about who's coming next. And I think that too is so hopeful and powerful, and really it was why it was such a joy to work on this.
I can tell. One of the things that I heard after people saw the film in its entirety was thank you. So I want to say thank you to the both of you.
Thank you.
And I'd like to ask if folks in the audience have a question or two for Donna
right
or Dawn. Yes. Hi.
If you have a question, could you please use the microphone?
Oh, okay.
Oh, there it is.
I was like, where?
Yeah.
I'm like, is it coming up here? Right.
I loved in the film how not only did you talk about the advocacy, which I think young people know all about today, but you also highlighted stealth and data research.
Yeah.
What do you think is the most sort of underappreciated lesson of Title IX that today's change makers could use? What do you think is something that they should be taking notes on and saying, let's try that maybe doesn't get as much attention, but from your experience and what you saw really works?
I mean, the big thing is you don't have to shout to be powerful, is that sometimes it's better to be quiet at first and get your bill passed. And so, I think DC audiences usually have some familiarity with the legislative process, and so you understand an education bill is a must pass. You can't not fund federal education. So there's no way that bill is going to fail. And so the really intelligent strategy of just making sure it's there. And I think, I do a lot of films. I've made a film about John Lewis. I've made a film about many other advocates. And one thing they always emphasize is get the first W. Get that first win and build. You don't have to win the whole banana. You want to keep going and going and going and building. And so thinking that long-term strategy, I mean, Donna, talked about working from the 1970s. She's still working today. So, this is a lifelong, and you will see Billie Jean, is just throughout our series. She advocates constantly and consistently for equality writ large.
Yeah.
And so I think, understanding that most struggles for human rights and equality are interrelated. And so what I love is seeing the women say, the civil rights movement did this. What applies to our struggle? And how can we advance that? So I loved learning about that.
I think what you see and what you just alluded to was the networking and the reaching out to other groups and planning. And I also think data is really important. One of the things that we'd always have to come up with these arguments about why we should play. And we were able early on to get some studies with Nike and other organizations to really sit down and say, well, as far as sports is concerned, why? What is it what does it offer? Well, we know that young girls that play sports are more likely to graduate, reach higher levels of positions in the corporate world, earn more money, and it goes on and on and on. But when I started working with Ernst & Young, I had this idea that I wanted to help women athletes transition out of sports into professions. And we didn't know what the real numbers were about how does this experience impact our economy, because that's what Ernst & Young was interested in, because they have the Winning Women program, and it's mostly women entrepreneurs. And we found out, and you used the statistic, that 94% of women in C-suites in the corporate world have had a sports background, and 50% competed in college. Well, that's powerful. And that was all new. And that just opened up our ability to reach out to corporations and get them to support us. So that when you want to get your point across, and it's part of marketing and strategy, but you need to do that. And that was really helpful in getting sponsorship and support.
Oh, dueling microphones.
Hello.
Hi.
First off, thank you very much. I took sports law in college and vaguely remember Title IX, but this was very illuminating, and I think just helps to really educate truly what it's all about. I have a seventh grade daughter playing volleyball, and it just touches home with looking at the way the boys are treated versus the girls. I just wanted to ask, I'm from San Antonio, Texas, and the Final Four was held there frequently, and I don't know if you all remember, but recently some of the female basketball players were taking pictures and sharing on social media how the weight room for the female athletes was a few dumbbells on the floor versus the men. So obviously this is still a fight that continues to be had. Just wanted to see if you could comment on the future outlooks, and then throwing in the transgender athletes and how that complicates Title IX or doesn't in your all's view.
Do you want to talk about the final with basketball?
Well, first of all, I have to be positive and talk about how our decisions here and what we do for our collegiate athletes has really made an impact in the international community. I mean, we almost have 49% of women on the field to play during the Olympic competition. When I competed, we were less than a third. And we didn't have professional sports. So there's been a springboard. What you're looking now, though, is a real shifting of alliances and rules within the collegiate community, which could have a big impact on where I'm very focused, which is Olympic sports. I'm on the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee Executive Board. And with the name, image, and likeness ability for athletes to bring in revenue, it could create a very big disruption. And it presents problems of credibility, and I also think corruption, because some of these organizations are creating agencies where they're negotiating with athletes to come to schools. And some of these organizations, which used to be booster clubs, are really unbalancing the scales when it comes to that environment. Also, you see the shifting of alliances. You saw Stanford and UCLA decide to go out of the Pac-10 and move into the Pac-12. What kind of impact is that going to have? So I think when we're looking at the collegiate environment, we're looking at just a lot of things that we have to focus on. And I think the big impact will be on women's sports and Olympic sports. Because if the schools could have it, Stanford dropped 11 sports during COVID. And they were all Olympic sports. Fortunately, because there's advocates at schools, the students stood up. And I will have to mention Nancy Hogshead was very much involved in passing the Safe Sport Act in Congress. Was able to push back at Stanford, and they were able to reinstate, with the leadership of one of the trustees, those 11 sports. But not every school is going to have that. So I think that from an Olympic perspective, we're really being challenged.
At the elementary, junior high, and high school level, female participation in athletics is through the roof. And Birch Bayh said this at the beginning, it's kind of, if you build it, they will come. And they did. And so girls are participating earlier, which means they're getting better and stronger. And so they're able, what we also see is, this increase in professional women's teams. So there's a place to go after you've had a college career. There's, the WNBA, there's women's pro soccer, there's, so there's just all this opportunity. So we definitely have seen the legacy of Title IX is increased participation, and that extends. We don't have equality, though. We just have to look at Brittany Griner and the fact, do you think they would keep Michael Jordan in Russia? No way, right? So there's work to do. I tend to be a person who likes to look at the work that has been done and the possibility for the future. So, that's kind of where I keep my focus. Our episode 4 focuses on the conversation around trans kids. A lot of attention is paid to, like Leah, like swimming and at those higher levels. But there's a really robust conversation about trans identifying kids participating in elementary school and in junior high school. And so, I think that those are necessary conversations about just what participation means. And then it actually does, what it does is it brings the focus back to education, which is where it should be, instead of to the very elite class of athletes where there's actually kind of, a big debate about participation.
I think you said the most important thing is that we have to have the dialogue. Right. And up until now, there's been a great reaction on both sides. And I've been part of a working group where we've been having dialogues, and we're getting better at it. But there's a great amount of confusion about how do you accommodate every child in our schools that are federally funded, and how do you protect 50 years of progress under Title IX, and what does that mean? And does it mean that the women's category should be totally open from every age, or is pre-puberty an issue? Every sports federation is going through this process right now, all over the world, and it's going to take time to find the solution.
Hi.
Hi, thank you for this outstanding production. Quick question on the Tennessee State women's track team. They were all on scholarships, weren't they?
Yes.
That's pretty amazing at a time period when women weren't getting anything like that. I wonder if you could comment a little bit more about what you learned, what you saw on that. It's fantastic.
Well, you're talking about the Tiger Bells.
Tiger Bells.
Ed Temple.
Yeah, great.
And Ed Temple was just one of those committed coaches, just made it happen. Went to Tennessee State, borrowed for money, brought these Wilma Rudolph, Willie White, a great. In fact, in 1960, when I was 13, I walked up to the women's track team and I met Earlene Brown, Willie White, Wilma Rudolph, and we became friends forever. And that was just one little pocket where a guy was passionate and he helped elevate all women in track and field. But that was not the case across the country. It was a very special program. And it's a story that really should be told in its entirety, because I traveled with Wilma all over the country when Humphrey was vice president, and in a special program called Operation Champ. And we'd go into inner cities and give clinics and work with Vista and Head Start. And it was an incredible program. It was a great program. I just wish it had continued, because it was the right answer to go into the inner cities with these athletes and work with the kids.
It was another favorite moment, which is why it's like too hard to so one of the things ESPN did is when the series was just coming out, was an installation celebrating women in sports through history, physical installation. And we had Wyomia come,
Yes,
Donna was
great.
there. And I think it was one of the first times so I mean, like ESPN blew it out. Like they made a reel. There was a full, like large banner,
pictures.
like not as big as the one outside here, but like really, really large.
Yeah.
And then footage of her races.
Yeah.
And
was great.
and I mean, she cried, you
She
know,
did.
and it's because, you know, she wasn't doing it for recognition. She was doing it because she was talented. She was doing it, she loved it. She was doing it for the scholarship. But that recognition helps. It matters, you know. She's two-time Olympic gold medalist, back to back. Only person in history to have that accomplishment.
First in history.
You know, first to have it. So it's you know, really, it should be celebrated. And I was really, really happy that ESPN did that for her. You know, it was
an extraordinary moment, and she really did get weepy.
She didn't
singing.
know that it was going to be there.
And-
So we just invited her to come over
Yeah.
and see it, and then, you know, we got that reaction. Then I was like, oh, we should have filmed that.
Yeah.
But whatever.
Yeah.
That's what always happens.
Hi.
Hi. I had a question about how, obviously at the time, it was very hard for women alone to get actual policies changed due to the fact that it was almost entirely men in the government. But beyond that, how do you get people to be interested in a cause that doesn't necessarily affect them? I know nowadays there are so many people campaigning for so many different things we need to change in this world. It can be hard to find people who still have the emotional capacity to care about the thing you're trying to get changed.
That's a good
Yeah,
question.
that's a great question. You know, I do think people can get cause fatigue. You know, that's real. And I think all of us, you know, you pick up the newspaper and it's climate and war and racism. And so, you know, and I make a lot of films about these things. So I have found that the most effective advocacy tool I've found is finding the commonality, which often is humanity.
Yeah.
So I'll give you an example. I made a film called Gideon's Army about public defenders, and it's an all verite film, so there's not interviews. So we're following this kid, and he was a kid who was arrested. There was no evidence that he had committed this crime, but he couldn't pay bail, and so he was stuck in jail. And so, you know, he finally, like, his mother literally worked 3 jobs to make bail to get her kid out, because a lot of people plead guilty because they can't stand being in jail. So when I'm telling that story, it's the question you're asking. I'm like, how do you get people who don't have a kid in jail to care about this poor kid? And so when we went to his house, I asked his mother the question that every person in here who's ever come across a baby, what was DeMonte's like as a child? And she said, oh, DeMonte's was a very good baby. You know, he would sleep and he would. So there's 2 kinds of babies. There's the babies that sleep and the babies that don't. And so people started saying, DeMonte's was the baby who slept. And so they're like, oh, he's so good. But what it does is it flips the switch. He's not a black kid in the bad neighborhood in Atlanta with his pants down and tattoos. He's the baby. And then she starts talking about him as a child. And everybody has that impulse that, wait, we can agree that we protect children. He's 16, he's still a child. And so, you know, finding that commonality, but I think also, like, meeting people where they are. Nobody likes to be lectured, you know? So, like, a lot of what I like to do in films is to present people as honestly and to let them come through and speak, you know, with their voices. And then whatever you take from it, you take from it, you know? Like, not having an overt, like...
Well, I'm just going to throw in that that's the beauty of a really terrific filmmaker.
That's true.
Who is looking at individuals through their aspirations, not framing them by what may be perceived as their circumstances at that time. That's a huge kind of difference when we think about film. I just wanted to throw that in just because it was the right time.
Is there one more question?
Hi.
Hi, thank you for coming. It was more statements than comments, but part of it was perhaps because my mother played basketball. She didn't mention until I was maybe a freshman in high school. She asked us why we didn't play basketball. We said, why? She said, because I played basketball, and she graduated in 1948 in a tiny town in North Dakota.
Wow.
I don't know if she played full or half court, but she did play. So I didn't know that. Somebody asked me, and I had no idea that they played half court. But
They did.
so
Yeah,
some
they
people
did.
did.
That was a big
Even in the
argument,
40s in a little tiny town that never had more than 400 people in North Dakota. The other one is I grew up over the hill from Mill Valley, which is the girl that had sued to get girls into Little League.
Yes.
So it hadn't. I was already swimming at that time. I didn't care about Little League, but my sister did play. So I think some of it is maybe how you grew up. So I grew up maybe in the right place at the right time, and I later swam for since you would know, the Ann Curtis Swim Club, Summer
I knew
League.
her.
So. And at that time, Barbara Boxer was on the county board, and Diane Feinstein was the mayor in San Francisco. Wow. So, I don't know if you know, Ron Dellums was the representative in Oakland, and Willie Brown was there. So to me, women and minorities in positions of power was normal. I had to leave the Bay Area to find out it wasn't normal. So for some people, swimming, or not swimming, but sports and girls, it might depend on where you grew up, because if I had grown up in probably rural Alabama, probably would not have had the same opportunities. So some of it might be connected to now people have more opportunities and they see what girls and women can do. And now you have more people who've had that experience that can help it going forward.
Thank you.
that. You know, it's where you grew up and it's when you grew up.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
yeah.
if the teams are there, you can, you know, when I was in, you know, you're offered, are you going to do this or this? It's not whether, it's which one are you going to do. I will also just tell you, you know, very quickly, my older son, we were making a film and we were filming Eric Holder when he was Attorney General. And he's making a speech. And we're sitting at the table, and they sat us at the table with the luminaries. So they sat us with Deval Patrick, who's the governor of Massachusetts. And so I'm like, Barack Obama's president. We're sitting at the table with Deval Patrick, who's the governor of Massachusetts, and Eric Holder speaking. So I'm like so proud as a mother. I put this evening together for my 9-year-old child to see. And I said, Eli, who's my kid, I said, what do you notice about the Attorney General? And he goes, he's got a mustache. And I thought, okay, like he doesn't. But for him, the president's black, the governor of Massachusetts is black, Eric Holder's black. Like the thing that's interesting is the mustache. And you know, it'd be nice if we could get to a place where, like, for women and for for all people, that like that's the interesting thing.
That's true.
So
That's true. Wow, well, I don't know about you, but I think this was a wonderful conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please, thank you to Marcia, Don, and Donna. And thank you all for coming. As previously advertised, there are 3 other episodes. Check them out. I promise you, they're equally as engaging. Brings it forward to today. So thank you again so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.